The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Psychi, Help University, or any affiliated organizations. This podcast is intended for educational and discussion purposes only. Psychi does not endorse, verify, or take responsibility for any statements made by the guest or the host. If you ever feel mental distress or need mental health support, you are encouraged to seek help from a qualified mental health professional. You can find more information and resources in the description box. Just remember that you are not alone.
Hi everyone, welcome to the very first episode of our InPsyOut Pro. Today we have a very special guest with us, which is Dr. Eugene.
Hello, Heisi. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me on your very first show for Psych In, Psych Out. My name is Eugene, and I'm presently a professor here at the Department of Psychology at Help University, where I teach subjects on, research methods, although my primary interest and expertise is in emotions and positive psychology and the science of well-being.
Yeah, it's so good to have Dr. Eugene here today, especially when he mentioned that he's an expert in emotions. So I think today's topic is definitely in your area. So before we start off into our today's topic, right, we would like to start it with something more light, and a slight twist in our entire podcast program, which will be a tradition for our upcoming guests as well, which is to answer this question.
Okay.
Would you love to describe yourself in 3 emojis to our audience?
Okay, so the 3 emojis which I tend to use most of all, maybe number 1, right, just by a little bit more than the others, is the slight smile emoji. So it's not the one with the open mouth, right, but it's that very ambiguous, I get it, right, here's a smile, right, I'm not my cheeks are not blushing, but it's just 2 dots and a smile, and that invites a little bit of ambiguity in the recipient. Is that a good sign? Or is that this person is hiding something behind me, right? So I like that slight subtle smile because you could interpret that in so many different ways. Another emoji which I like is the exasperated smile. So that's the one with the drop of a sweat on the side. So I kind of like that, right? So when someone says something really awkward or embarrassing, or there's a potential for it to be misinterpreted, right? So I'm going to respond that way, right? And yeah, that also, I seem to like to give off a very ambiguous vibe in my responses, right? But if I say yes, thumbs up, right? I would rather not use the thumbs up. My third most frequently used emoji is the sunglasses emoji. Oh. So here's this guy with the sunglasses. You would know that emoji. So it's cool, right? You can't see the eyes, but this person is smiling, this emoji is smiling. And it's just for me, that's shorthand for cool, got it. Yeah, that's great, right? So those would be my 3. An honorable mention, I don't get to use this very often, but when someone says something very silly, or I choose not to respond in a way that makes fun of them, I'll use the clown emoji.
Oh, okay. I can tell according to Eugene's response, everything is quite ambiguous. Mm-hmm. We hope today's answer is not too ambiguous.
We'll see how we go, right? With that, yeah.
That being said, we would love to introduce our very first topic today, which is AI and emotions. As mentioned before, Eugene is an expert in this area, but we do have some questions that maybe go a little bit beyond than that, but I think it will be interesting to also hear from you. So what's your first thought when you first hear about this topic?
I think this is a topic which is on a lot of people's minds, right? Because we see the rollout and the influence, the reach and the impact of ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, right, or any AI platform. I know some students use Perplexity as well. And it's also been a topic of sort of reflection on my end, because you're getting to a point where it seems very likely, right? And I have to rewind and to review my argument in one of my earlier books to say that I think computers are still going to find it really difficult to mimic or to empathize human emotion. I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. So in the next revision of my book, I probably have to say I think it's gotten very close to a point where people are seeing the humanness in AI, at least from their words. So even in the absence of facial cues, even in the absence of emojis, I'm not sure which AI platforms you use, but the ones that I use don't tend to respond using emojis. They don't have facial expressions, right? They have icons, they have all the other kinds of symbolisms. But even in the absence of facial cues, we are inferring a lot about the extent to which AI empathizes with us. We are seeing or getting a sense that, I think AI understands me, right? And is being very compassionate towards me. So I think it's gotten to a point where I've had to revise my my understanding. Language shapes so much of our worldviews and certainly our emotional experiences. I think what the AI systems have done quite well, remarkably well, is to mimic that just from the usage of words, in the absence of what we tend to rely on in terms of facial cues, tone of voice, nonverbal gestures, right, for emotion. So they've done really well, and it's scarily close to what would be very human-like to me.
Since we're on the point where we are talking about how AI is already in the progress of mimicking human emotions, do you think this is something good or bad as a whole?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because I think of our AI as a new kind of, I like to call it a technological fire. So fire can be used for good or for ill, right? You could use it to warm up your food, cook your food certainly, right? To fend off threats and dangerous animals. This is like during our ancestors' time. I think the kind of technological fire that we're playing with right now is something which can stand for good. It can help us join the dots, solve complex equations. I know of Professor Marty Seligman, for instance, who I learned positive psychology from, says that he relies very much on AI, not extensively, but he's found it really, really helpful in his writing and his reasoning. But on the other side, right, and you see the prevalence of AI usage among students. It's no longer ChatGPT, I believe, because some students use it, and you could pretty much term it cheat GPT, right? They're using it to do their own thinking, to do their own writing. And so it gets us to question the value of how much we want to outsource and we want to replace AI with our fundamental human capacities or abilities. If we start outsourcing our capacity for empathy to AI, where does this lead us? I don't think we'll know yet, right? It can be for good, it can be for bad. I still maintain the position that AI is a complement that amplifies our most human and most innate qualities, empathy being one of them, critical thinking being another, but not as a replacement for it.
But what if today, like in a very hypothetical situation, there is like some neuroscientist able to actually brain out the entire brain, neuron by neuron, creating it? Do you think there is one day where AI can actually feel the emotion as we do?
I think that seems to be a distinct but not unreasonable and nor an unrealistic possibility. It's almost as if we're talking about science and science fiction, and this kind of like line between them is actually already blurred. And maybe just to share a little bit, because that's such an interesting question. It reflects so much into our understanding of consciousness, will. As it is for now, I'm not an expert in AI, but what I do see is that although it does rely very much on large language models, past experiences, past accounts that a person has shared and fed into the program, right? It doesn't seem to, at least from what I can tell, have the ability to show agency. So what does it do in a new and novel situation? You could have a model for it, but in a manner of speaking, it will know how you used to act in the past, whether it can be used to determine what it will do in the future if it resembles you as a person. That doesn't seem to be the case. On that note, I toyed around with the idea because I keep journals. So I have kept a journal of myself, my daily interactions and experiences for the past 20 years already. So there's a lot of information there about me. And this was even before AI was a thing. So I not really experimented with it, but I entertained the idea to say, hey, if I uploaded every single one of my entries, and each of my entries was like a day-to-day account of what happened to me in my life, right? The people I met, experiences that I have, places I traveled to, even right down to the meals that I had in the day, right? So if I fed all of this into AI and I asked one of the platforms, ChatGPT, could you replicate me in an AI form? Could I create an AI version of myself? And the response it gave me was very thought-provoking. It said that I could give you and I could model a reasonably accurate model representation of you in a digital form. So it's like Eugene AI, right? And the representation or the similarity between who you are and what the Eugene AI model would be very closely similar to one another. But it also highlighted its limitations in that it won't be able to do, at least not now, given the technology, but I'm sure it will catch up, right? It won't be able to do exactly what you would do in the future. So it might base its behaviors on patterns of your past behavior, but whether or not it determines how you will truly act in the human form in future actions, I think that remains to be seen.
Do you think it's possible that in the future, if AI were fed with those schemas, they can also, have like a replica of Eugene and predicted what he will react in a certain situation?
I think it's certainly possible, and I think the ramifications of it for who we are, I think you are alluding a little bit to this idea of essentialism, right? What makes us human was the question that you started off with, right? Is it our memories? Is it our upbringing? I think it's a combination and a constellation of many of these factors, right? But if you convert them into a digital form, like again, going back to the example that you shared earlier on, the neuroscientist is able to digitize or to turn into numbers every single essence of our experience and our memories, right? Is it then human in its sense, right? So you have to wonder. I think we will eventually get to the point where it is possible, maybe in the not too distant future, and then maybe that will leave us into another philosophical or maybe an existential conundrum. If there's a digital replica version of myself outside of who I am, flesh and blood in a biological form, but now in a digital form. Is that what we want? I think we're still on the fence. I know people in the community who say that AI is great for well-being. It's great for us to not to replace it entirely as a form of therapy, but it's a first point of contact for someone who might be going through some difficult challenges and struggles. Then you have, on the other hand, a group who says that, and I kid you not, there's a title of a book called "If Anyone Builds It, We All Die," something to that effect, right? And it's this idea of a super AI to a point where, it will pretty much overwhelm, control, right, every single aspect of our experience and our actions. Do we really want that? I think we're playing with a very, very powerful form of an unknown fire here, right? So we'll have to also have the ethical guardrails and the means to actually control the fire, so to speak.
Understood. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think since we are on the topic of this technological fire, which could be useful in therapies, right? What's your thought on AI chatbot therapy?
On whether we want to, infuse more of AI into therapy, it's not a matter of whether we have, because apps have already done that. We've had a lot of different forms of software, right, that sort of incorporate, and this has been going on for maybe even before the pandemic, when that was an idea that was starting to be rolled out into apps, right? You can reach out to AI first, and this friendly chatbot will provide you that, that first assistance before they put you in contact with someone, a human therapist. So it's a matter of whether this is going to, I suppose, come to a point where people swap out, right, an actual human therapist for AI chatbot therapy instead. I think there's still something human about the one-on-one, person-to-person interaction that you won't get with AI. And here I want to maybe just bring in the idea of, you might have heard of this, it's called sycophancy. So it's this idea that AI tends to be very agreeable, and it tends to be, hey, this is great, right? And it says something about how the software wants you to continue chatting with it, because at the end, at least for ChatGPT, the program will offer, where would you want to go from here? Would you like me to do this, and a whole bunch of options? And you call onto that and say, that's interesting, I never saw it from that angle before. And so tell me about the different attachment styles and how it affects our ability to regulate our emotions, for instance. That could be something which you never thought of, but the AI program is smart enough, right, from its large language model to say that this is where the person might be interested in exploring further, because it accumulates countless amount of other sentences, words, streams from other users to say that this might be a likely angle that this person wishes to explore. Look, I think it's a matter now of deciding whether we think about AI as therapy, knowing that it has this tendency to be exceedingly agreeable, to prompt you to want to continue answering, or are you willing to confront, right, the reality of speaking to an actual human therapist whose main aim, at least for a good therapist, is to help you be a better version of yourself. A good therapist is not going to consistently just want to agree with everything you say, right? We see that bias a little bit more in AI, right? But a good therapist, I should say, asterisk, right, is going to want to assist the person to develop their own agency, to cultivate a greater self-awareness and reflection, an ability to see themselves clearly. These are not things which you will get from an AI software, which is going to just be biased towards, yes, you are right, yes, you're right. Yeah. That is not selfishness, that is bravery. That is not, that is not procrastination. That's being very careful and being very selective about the quality of your work. No, that is not being pedantic or fussy. That is your preference for high quality. You could go on. You could have probably heard of all of this before, but is this necessarily reflective of the truth? Is this necessarily helpful, right? I don't think it is. So I think we got to be careful when we think about using AI for something quite as sacred, I should say, as our deepest human desires and experiences.
I'm not sure if you've tried this before, but I've seen online where people who don't want to only get positive response from the AI, right? They will actually train their ChatGPT or their chatbots to do things like, please don't always agree with me, criticize if I made any mistakes, be critical and things like that. And it seems that they're able to now change their role from the always angelic friend to someone who sort of give you a more constructive criticism and really turns you into somebody who is better in some sense. Do you think that challenged the part where you mentioned about agency before this?
Ooh, okay. I think that for the people who have actually asked the AI systems to, all right, just give it to me straight, right? Just be direct with me, right? I think it takes a certain kind of courage and bravery. It's a kind of psychological openness, right, to being criticized. If you send in, say, your draft or a series of reflections and journal prompts, can you tell me where I did wrong, how it can be better? Don't hold back, right? Just be as critical as possible, right? I think it will do a good job. It may not necessarily be always helpful, nor is it accurate, right? Which is why the disclaimer at the end of every AI response is, ChatGPT may make mistakes, right? Gemini may make mistakes. Please check your responses accordingly. Whether or not this will promote agency, it's hard to say. I don't know. It could go either way, right? It could encourage. It will certainly feed into, right, the large language models, right, to say that some people would prefer a more direct, unrestrained, more critical approach, right? You can adjust it. I haven't toyed around that much with it. I kind of like the default so far, but I do challenge it. So my way of actually balancing this, right, rather than say, just, shoot me down, right? And here's a draft of my new book. Please be as critical as possible to it, right? I think that's not necessarily helpful because, again, in as much as the AI system can make mistakes from being overly generous with its praise and comments, it can be overly critical as well with its criticisms of you. So what I do if I can call it training the AI, especially when I ask it to assess my work, right? Could you share or could you review this attachment, which is the draft for my next chapter? Don't do any rewriting, right? But tell me where the rough edges are, where the paragraphs don't seem to connect with one another, and explain why. So you could train it to still be critical of your work, but asking it for more information for why, for instance, this section could be the one that's improved, or where a term is used incorrectly, an alternative term. So you're not using AI to actually rewrite, right, the entire chapter or the paragraph, or even the sentence. It's going to give you some general suggestions on how to smooth things out.
Do you think having connection with pets is the same as having connection with AI? Because we sort of feel like both of them don't answer you in a way that is ultimately human. What's your thought on this?
On the comparison between pets and chatbots, I don't know, is there, and I'm thinking about this from an empathy perspective as well, the kind of connection that you have with your pets, I think it's going to be very different from the connections that you have with an AI chatbot. You would feel that the AI chatbot, right, understands you. It returns very logical, affirming, compassionate statements that get you to feel that you are understood, that you are seen. That's one type of empathy, I feel. It is perspective taking, what we call cold empathy, although it's starting to feel very warm already, right, based on responses. And it's called, cold perspective taking empathy, right? So that's the more mental state in which we feel that someone is understanding us. What pets do, though, you notice that, I don't think anyone here has a dog or cat that talks to them, right, the same way that AI does, right? I think it offers to their nonverbal cues, their gestures, their cuddling up to you, their snuggling up to you, the fact that they allow you to touch them every once in a while, dogs more so than cats, right? It's a kind of emotional bond. So I think even if your pets don't say anything to you, they just woof or bark or meow towards you, right? At least you know that there's something in the tactile, the auditory, that makes you feel connected to them, right? So I think there are different mechanisms of empathy at play here. We're to a point where we get an AI-powered pet, right? And then maybe that was going to change the whole situation again, offering both cognitive and well, imagine a cat or a dog that you can chat with, right? Say, let me tell you about my day, right? But you're also going to let me rub you or scratch you behind your ear, right? I think that's going to be, so idea for anyone who's actually interested, right? Who'd like to see what's happening there. But it's actually already in existence. Some of these therapy pets, right, that are motorized or they're like powered by very complex robotics, right? The tactile sensation, that feel for people in elderly homes, right? Like Paro the seal, which they introduced in Japan. Yeah, these are ways in which you fulfill something without words, right? So that's a different kind of empathy. There's a different kind of emotional fulfillment that people are getting from their pets. They're probably not getting as much from AI chatbots.
I really wanted to ask, what's your opinion on this? Do you think we can actually feel the love from an AI chatbot?
Logically, if you think about it, right, we feel, well, you know what, I'm not going to be that silly person who falls in love with their AI, right? I think that was the premise of at least one of the themes, right, for the movie Her, the one which I was mentioning earlier on, in which the lead character did not assume that he would fall in love with and want the AI software, right, to be just fully his and his alone, right? I think what the system and the software does, what AI does really well, is form that, or create at least that illusion of connection, right? And again, back to the movie, there's a scene in which I remember that, okay, I can only hear you, I can only hear your voice, but I cannot see you. And so what then happened was that the AI recommended a service where an actual human being is going to come and act out, right? Or to portray the AI software in action. So you get a fulfillment of, you can touch, you can see, you can feel, you can do, whichever, right? With the human being, right? But in a sense that this person, the human actor is playing out the role of the AI in its physical form, right? Again, just to go back to what we shared and had a discussion on earlier, is that it fulfills something, right, within us, a need for connection. Maybe a need a connection that is increasingly rare in a digital world, in a world in which social demographic changes means that people are living apart, right? They're having more individual families, right? Or there's just single person households, right? So fulfillment of that. So I'm just looking at the notes here, and Ken, just sort of remember coming across stories of, I think it was a Japanese man who married a virtual pop idol singer, Hatsune Miku, right? So that was one as well. And then very sadly, I'm not sure whether you find any humor in this, right? But this person was obviously emotionally invested in the virtual idol, and the software company, I think, stopped the subscription. So that's it, right? You don't have access to your digital wife anymore, right? People marrying their AIs, as I've seen from the notes here. It's an illusion of connection, I feel, right? Because real human connections are messy. You're not going to find that perfect someone, right? And you can find someone who's close as possible to your ideal, and then you work around the rough edges from what I can tell. But this illusion of perfection, this illusion of, completely empathetic connection, I don't think it's something which it just sort of outsources the realness of a human connection to technology. Can we actually feel love from AI? I think can, right? But this is when we just switch off our more critical impulses and just say, like, it's just such a good feeling, right? To be connected, loved unconditionally. Yeah, on that note, right, on empathy, unconditional positive regard. And it's someone who is deprived of unconditional positive regard is going to say that this AI system, this AI software knows me in and out. It's better than any relationship that I've ever had. And all power to the people who actually want that. But I'm just questioning whether that is the truest, most authentic human connection. If it's stripped away of its imperfections, is it still authentic? There's an episode in Black Mirror, the TV series, that actually speaks to this point, right? So maybe just as a final point before we move to the final bit, right, of the session today, if you could take someone's social media footprint, maybe their journals even, and if you could feed that into an Android, and this Android is going to be unconditionally positive, never going to disagree with you, yes honey, yes sweetheart, you're completely right, I am so lucky to have you, right, never argues with you, right? And on paper, theoretically, that might sound like a great idea, like no arguments with partners, but I don't think that's what ideal relationships are. People are going to get into some kind of disagreements, conflicts and frictions, and eventually, hopefully, if they resolve it properly, are going to make them, one another, better people. Right? They're journeying and traveling towards life together. They are managing life together, and they're making each other a better person. I don't think you're going to get that from a system that is going to 101% and then some more agree with you and say that you're completely right all the time. You're perfect as you are. Nothing is. You don't need to change anything. I accept and love you for all you are. Right? It's in the messiness. It's in maybe the imperfections in which we become better versions of ourselves. And I think AI strips something away from that.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing a lot of your thoughts on how this us human establishing relationship with AI and how you think that there is something lacking that is being stripped off from AI. I think essentially it's also about how it really also goes back to the question where we say what makes us human, right? I think that's also where the part where in a relationship there should be ups and downs that make it authentic, and someone who is always agreeable might not be the ultimate authentic relationship that we are yearning for. So to close off today's section, right, we will just go on with the last question, which I think will be more practical for the audiences who are listening. So maybe we can hear some of his thoughts on how do we sort of incorporate positive psychology intervention into AI.
And so it can be something quite as mundane and quite as straightforward, I believe, as just asking for a prompt on, say, look, I want to start getting into mindfulness meditation, for instance. What are some of the prompts? What should I do? Here's a script that you could follow. And you could, of course, right, just find the script anywhere online. But if you suggest to AI, say, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety recently, I'm not, certain about whether my relationship with my loved one is going to last, right? What specific forms of meditation, mindfulness meditation, could you encourage, right? I think it's also a great idea to check on, say, your habits and your practices. So what I've done prior in enhancing my day-to-day well-being is, here's a schedule, here's when I have lunch, before that, here's what time I get up, here's how many hours I sleep, here's what I do in the morning, here's when I fit in my exercise, sometimes in the day, sometimes later in the evening, here's when I have my lunch, here's what I do after the morning's work, right? And so just to feed in these sort of schedules to AI and to say, can you give me the scientific backing or the scientific evidence, right, assessing my schedule based on whether this is the optimal way of organizing my time. So I've used that before and I found it to be quite helpful, quite useful. Like, for instance, the first thing that I changed was to delay my caffeine intake. So this is the idea to say that when you start a day, the first thing some people do is to just down a cup of caffeine. But that's actually a bit of a waste because your body is just building up, right? It's still relying on cortisol when you get up, right? Just to fire yourself up. So if you're having your cup of joe, your coffee at the very start, it sort of cancels out. It doesn't have any effect whatsoever. When you wait for maybe an hour and a half before your cortisol levels actually dip, then you take the coffee, then you spike it back up again, right? Because otherwise it's just going to cancel each other out, right? You're not going to get the benefits of the coffee then if you waited. So small things like that, which was brought to my realization. I also got to know that both morning exercise is great, but evening exercise is also fine. They have differential effects. And some suggestions on what you might want to do in moving your meal times a little bit ahead so that you don't get too bogged down with carb coma or the sleepiness that comes in, right? Do all the tougher work first. So I use it to sort of refine my schedule. So that's another way, right? So first thing, you can use it as a general search, right? Or even to create a script for, a wellness or well-being routine. Second, to check in with your schedule, right? Those are just two of these suggestions. I'm exploring as well, and I've shared with you, right? Using AI as a form of reflection. So I do writing, right, narrative writing, expressive writing quite a fair bit, right? And sometimes it's just quite useful, right, rather than to just write it down, which is already immensely helpful, to just, hey, I need some practice with reappraisal. So am I seeing this situation correctly? Am I seeing this in a very narrow perspective? And am I only seeing this from my own point of view, right? Could you give me the context, right? And of course, just to be wary of the tendency for AI to want to respond to you in a way that invites further responses, invites further questions, and seems to be agreeing with you. So use it as a complement, right? Rather than as a replacement for your well-being routines or whichever plans that you're having to improve your overall sense of life satisfaction, meaning, right? And just general well-being as a whole.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think from what we heard from Dr. Eugene just now, I will conclude it into like 3 simple steps. I would say the first one is maybe a prompt for your mindfulness practice. It can be tailored according to whatever you need at that moment. Second thing is about reviewing your own schedules and habit and see if there is any point that you can chip in with a better alternative or a better solutions. And finally is using it as a reflective tools that help you to see things in different point of view, or maybe a better reappraisal tools that can help you to sort of regulate your emotion and also express yourself better. I think that will be some of the takeaways that the audience can try if you were using AI, so that you are not only using it for your assignment but also for your own well-being. Yeah, we would definitely hope that there will be lesser AI plagiarism when it comes to academics. And at the very final tone, I think it's also about ending this podcast with a more fun twist like what we did at the very beginning. So what we are planning to do is, for the upcoming guests, we will have our guest before to throw a question to them. But since Eugene is our first guest, so we plan to throw him the very first question. And the first question that our entire team comes up with is, since we talk a lot about relationship, so what's your greatest green and red flag in a relationship?
Wow, okay. So I have green flags, right? And these are very large, broad, like green flags. I look for someone who is fun to be around, so someone who's a good companion, someone who's also capable, right? So this person is someone that I could work with, someone I could interact well enough with, right? Not to say you date someone at work, right? But because partnerships involve managing a household, so there's a more serious component to it. But I think the third component is quite rare, but it's also the most essential. You're looking for someone, at least a green flag for me, is someone of good character. So you need someone who is a good companion, someone who is competent, capable, right? But by itself, right, those two wouldn't work. And I think sometimes with relationships, if you're only liking this person but you don't work well with them, then yeah, it's also going to create some friction. The third characteristic, character, is someone who makes you a better person in as much as you make them a better person as well. So you kind of mutually enhance and enforce one another. So those would be very simple 3 broad green flags. You enjoy their company. They are capable people. They are people who are also of good character. And you just sort of bring out the best in one another. So it's maybe an oversimplification on my end, but it's based on some positive psychology principles. Right, friend of pleasure, friend of utility, and what we call friend of virtue. Right, so someone who has all those 3, I think, is someone that would make for a good partner. And it's not to say that this is the person, right? To each their own. It really depends on what kind of company you like to keep, what kind of work you want to do together, right? And whether this person, sometimes when you see, right, so your friend or family member go with this person and say, not a good match, right? I think one of the reasons why we realize that is because this person doesn't seem to make, right, our friend a better person, right? And sometimes we stand in the way saying that, are you sure you want to go with this guy or with this woman, right? They seem to bring out the worst in them. So sometimes you can sort of tell just from these 3 criteria alone, right? So I suppose for what it's worth, if you think about red flags, anything that is on the flip side of it, something you don't enjoy their company, right? They're rude, they're mean, they're not generous, they're unkind, someone who is, who gets in your way. I mean, could be a colleague from hell. Thankfully, all my colleagues are from heaven, right? And someone, of course, who makes you a better person, although the third one is harder to identify because that influence is subtle, isn't it? And other people can see you have changed, you're no longer the same person, but you don't see that, right? So yeah, I think just maybe an oversimplification is my own model. If anyone's interested, we might actually do a study of it, right? 3 factors, company, competence, and character. So those would be just my 3.
Thank you so much for sharing. So there is 3 C's for the green flag of Eugene. It could be your model or you can have a very different one. It's just a reference and it's really fun to hear from you as well. So thank you so much for sharing. And since we have thrown you the first question, so it's time for you to throw the next question to our next mysterious guest. Yeah.
Okay, that'll be interesting. So a question. So I suppose if we go with the theme from our conversation today, so I could probably ask if, to the audience, to the listeners, and to the next guest you have on, the show, would you want to be able to live forever in a digital version of yourself? So regardless of your religious leanings, your spiritual beliefs, right? If you could exist in a digital form beyond your biological expiration date, right? And there's always going to be a copy of you left behind from all the stuff that you have uploaded, shared, preserved in a digital form. And it could be AI will be able to do enough at some point in recreating your digital persona, right? Of course, the more you share, the more complex, right, your character is going to be. Would you want that? Why or why not?
A very deep question.
So we're talking about meaning and living forever, right? This is one way, right? I think it's a kind of digital technological immortality. But of course, some people might not want it. Why? Some people do want it. Why? Maybe the answer to the yes is a little bit more obvious. But yeah, we'll see how you go with the next guest with that question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate all your answers, and I also hope that the audience get a little bit away. I know there's a lot, but don't worry, we'll cut it into different parts, and maybe we can just say bye to the camera. So, yeah, bye.
See ya.
See you. Thank you.